Okay, hi everybody. My name's Alex O'Hanlon. I'm the engagement manager for One Omaha. We're really excited to welcome you to the second installment of the From the Ground Up speaker series. From the Ground Up explores the most pressing issues Omahans face from a different angle, bringing in both content experts and neighborhood organizers to share their success stories and strategies. Our focus for 2024 is environmental justice. So in this series, we're going to cover the definition and history of environmental justice, how environmental justice issues will factor into upcoming city plans, what residents can do to advocate for strong environmental justice policies, and what residents can do to build coalitions to address environmental justice issues in their neighborhoods. Tonight, we're going to get a foundation for what environmental justice is and what environmental justice organizing can look like. On September 24th, we're going to be back here at the Benson Theater, and we'll be learning about how environmental justice issues will factor into the upcoming Climate Action Plan and the Omaha Comprehensive Plan, as well as how environmental justice factors into urban design more generally. And on October 29th, we'll be back here at the Benson Theater once again, and we'll be hearing from neighborhood organizers about environmental justice projects that they're working on in Omaha. So to register for those events, you can find the link on our social medias or go to oneomaha.org or just show up at 6 o'clock on those dates. So before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items. Please silence your phones and other electronics. Save all questions for the Q&A that we'll have at the end of the discussion. And emergency exits are directly behind you through the lobby and located to your left. So I'd like to introduce tonight's moderator, Kimara Snipes. Kimara is One Omaha's executive director and has been organizing in East Omaha communities since she was a teenager. She's continued that work through involvement in East Omaha neighborhood organizations as well as with the SONA leadership team. So with that, Kimara, take it away.
Thank you, Alex. Hey, y'all. I can't see you because it's really bright up here, but hopefully you're smiling. I'm really excited to be here tonight with our just exceptional panelists that we have here. We have Graham Christensen tonight, Cammy, Watkins, and Anthony Rogers-Wright. And so what I'd like to do is give you a little bit more about their background. So Graham P. Christensen was born in Omaha and grew up nearby on his family's farm. Despite the historical challenges presented to family farming, Graham followed his family's tradition and is actively involved in operating Christensen Farms Incorporated. Inspired by the potential of agricultural solutions, to deal with increasing air, water, and soil loss issues, the Christensens have been adopting regenerative principles on their farm. Graham is the founder and president of GC Resolve, a communications and consulting company who focuses on grassroots community development, mobilization, and education with an emphasis on environment, equality, and the creation of more resilient communities. Through these efforts, the Regenerate Nebraska Network was founded. Graham also owns and operates a second business, Mr. Go-Getter, GC Revolt, a solar and alternative energy development company, and is the state secretary and a director for the Nebraska Farmers Union. There we go, yeah. Second, on the end, we have Anthony Karefa Rogers-Wright. Anthony serves as a policy coordinator and analyst with the Black Alliance for Peace and the Black Hive with Movement for Black Lives. Prior to assuming these positions, Anthony was a policy coordinator and Green New Deal policy lead with the Climate Justice Alliance, where he assisted with developing local, state, and federal organizing and policy strategy for the alliances. Then 74 grassroots frontline-led organizations across the country. He has acted as a policy advisor for numerous candidates for elected office, including Senator Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign in 2020 and Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential campaigns in 2020 and 2016, when he represented the campaign during testimony to the DNC Platform Committee. Anthony serves on the board of directors of Friends of the Earth, Backbone Campaign, and Climate Critical Earth and Center for Sustainable Economy. Round of applause for Anthony. And last but definitely not least, we have Cammy Watkins. who is an Omaha native and graduated from Omaha South High School. Cammy has almost 20 years of experience working with not-for-profit organizations ranging from affordable housing to performing arts administration. The opportunity to work with many different facets of the business world have provided Cammy with vast insights into the business needs of organizations. She is excited to utilize this expertise to partner with various industries as they begin the journey of creating an inclusive office culture. Please once again help me welcome Graham, Anthony, and Cammy to the stage and thank them for being here. Before we get started, I did just want to take 1 minute to thank Conservation Nebraska and We Make Omaha for setting up tables to engage with you, our audience, tonight. I hope you've had a chance to stop by their table and visit with them. If not, please try to see them before you leave tonight. And of course, I also want to thank the Benson Theater for hosting us here this evening. So we got a lot to cover, y'all. So let's go ahead on and get started. Part of our mission is to educate community. So let's start off first with just providing some context to our audience. Anthony, can you give us a definition of environmental justice and some examples of environmental justice issues broadly?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Kimara. Thanks, Omaha. Thanks, everyone, for coming. If you've noticed, it's pretty warm out there today, and we'll be getting into why that is. But I think before we get into a set of definitions for what environmental justice is, it's important to understand that this concept is nothing new. As a matter of fact, it's probably close to 600 years old. I want to read an amazing quote from a book about environmental warfare in Palestine, used against Palestinians and Gazans specifically. And the author of this book said, "Settler colonialism is a form of domination that violently disrupts human relations with their environment." And that understanding of as soon as these lands started to be colonized, we are on stolen land, as many people know, that was the beginnings of environmental injustice. Okay, so fast forward to the creation of governments and agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency and various state agencies. The federal definition, as I like to say, EJ, defined by the state, is, quote, "Environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all peoples, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And fair treatment means no group should bear a disproportionate share of the negative environmental consequences resulting from industrial, governmental, commercial operations or policies." It's very, very nice. It's compact. It was probably poll tested, and I'm sure everybody really liked it. The way the movement defines environmental justice, Kimara, on the other hand, I think it's a little longer, but it's important, right? Just to set the table. So we define environmental justice as those cultural norms, values, rules, regulations, behaviors, policies, and decisions to support sustainability, where all people can hold with confidence that their community and natural environment is safe and productive. Environmental justice is realized when all people can realize their highest potential without interruption by environmental racism or inequity. Environmental justice is supported by decent paying and secure jobs, quality schools and recreation, decent housing, adequate health care, democratic decision-making, and finally, personal empowerment. And finally, we say environmental racism is the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color. Environmental justice is the movement's response to environmental racism. Last thing, I promise I'll shut up. Environmental equity is not environmental justice. Environmental equity is the government's response to the demands of the environmental justice movement. Government agencies like the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, have been trying to co-opt the movement by redefining environmental justice as fair and meaningful involvement, something they consistently fail to accomplish, by the way, but which falls short of the environmental justice vision. The environmental justice movement isn't seeking to simply redistribute environmental harms. We're trying to abolish them for everybody.
Okay. Can you talk about the history of the environmental justice movement in the United States?
Yes.
And what are some of the wins that activists have had, and what are some of the hurdles that they've had to face?
Yeah, no, really great question. Appreciate it. So I would say that in a contemporary sense, the 20th century version of environmental justice actually really started the night before a really important guy who a lot of roads are named after, named Martin Luther King, was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, which I was just talking to my brother Graham about. The day before he was assassinated, he was in Memphis, Tennessee to join a strike of black garbage workers who were being put on the most hazardous routes and exposed to the most hazardous materials. So maybe he didn't call it that then, but that kind of is what sparked it. Then, about 16 years later, wow, it's 1984, and he's 16 years after it, 68. Yeah. I'm old. Wow. But anyway, in 1984, a dear brother and a mentor named Dr. Benjamin Chavis got arrested protesting the dumping of polyfluorobiphenyls, or polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, nasty stuff, carcinogens, being disproportionately dumped in black communities, neighborhoods in Warren, North Carolina. While he was getting arrested, he started screaming, "This is environmental racism," and the phrase stuck. 3 years after that, he, along with the United Church of Christ, released just a seminal work. Everybody should read it. You can find it online, called Toxic Wastes and Race in the United States. This is 87. And what this report did was it found, with like basically a 99.999% confidence level, that race more than income, I'll say that again, race more than income determined how polluted your community was going to be and what you were exposed to. As a matter of fact, even today, a black family with a household income of $100,000 is still 6 times more likely to be situated near pollution and polluted facilities than a white family making with a household income of $50,000. So that's the history, and since then, there's been some elections, there's been some organizations started, there's been amazing uprisings getting to the point of like success stories. Standing Rock is a success story, and making sure that we understood that fossil fuel pipelines, breaking indigenous treaties, and impacting their ways of life, and really capturing people's imagination was I wouldn't call it a victory, but a level of raising consciousness. And we have to raise consciousness before we really take on the culprits, the biggest culprits of environmental racism: fossil fuel industry, petrochemicals, etc. As Graham will talk about, big ag, etc., etc. And other wins that that I would say is that there have been more and more states that have included environmental justice offices in their state environmental departments. And we have stopped some things. Like here in Nebraska, we stopped the Keystone XL pipeline, which was a nasty, nasty pipeline that would have wreaked havoc and polluted water. So those are good things. But the challenge obviously still continues. Last thing I'll say, Kimara, I promise. Today was really, really hot. Today's we have exceeded yet again the hottest year in the world. So for those of you who have young children, this will soon be the coldest summers of their lives. But we also had a report released by the American Medical Association that heat-related deaths have increased since 2016, by 117%. The vast majority of those people dying are black. 50% more of them are black, and this is due to climate change. So we have a lot more work to do. I'll stop there. I'm sorry. Wow. I'm from Brooklyn. I can just keep going.
I could continue to listen, but I think Alex will be mad at me. So, Graham, can you talk about some examples of environmental justice issues that face Nebraska, specifically as it relates to rural and agricultural sort of context?
Absolutely, Kimara, and thanks for moderating the panel on this topic today, and thanks everybody for being a part of this One Together, One Omaha event. Really appreciate y'all being here, and I appreciate being able to try to connect some dots between what's going on in rural and how it's going to impact the rest of the state, including urban areas, tribal communities, etc. So I want to start with water quality, right? That's the one that's like that's the glaring issue that's on the table, and we're finally, from a lot of the work that people have done over the last couple decades, starting to get this to the mainstream media off and on. We've had to do a lot of citizen scientistry to be able to collect data to start making points. And now what we've seen is that we've gotten to do that. A lot of groups come in and start doing more of that. And now a lot more people are starting to understand what's going on with their water. And this is a really important awakening for our state to have at this time. So let me lay out a couple of real life examples that I want to be able to point to. Some of you may have done a little reading of yourselves with the Flatwater Free Press, research on Governor Pellin's hog barns. Okay, so let's start off with this. The federal level, the limit that you're supposed to have for nitrates in the water is 10 parts per million. And let's remember, nitrates cause blue baby syndrome in infants who, as their cells can no longer absorb oxygen, so internally they suffocate, essentially. Long exposure to levels of 10 parts per million and more. The University of Nebraska Med Center would actually argue 2 parts per million or more leads to various kinds of cancers, stomach cancer, etc. And other illnesses come with long-term exposure of this nutrient. Now, plants need this nutrient to grow, but abusing how much of this we put out there, or various kinds of waste and misapplications of waste that seep down into waterways that have this nutrient in it, is kind of what we're starting to see starting to add up. So things are starting to get saturated. So you're getting drip, 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 drip into your aquifers that are filtered very well in the state of Nebraska. Most of our water isn't pulled from the river like it is in Iowa. But that drip, drip is what the University of Nebraska Med Center's former director, Dr. Alan Kolak, told us was going to happen as more and more of these systems are built around Omaha, therefore over time, degrading your water resource in the 2 biggest metro areas, Omaha and Lincoln, of course, being the other one. Governor Pellin's hog barns, remember 10 parts per million, but UNMC thinks that law should be dropped down to 2 parts per million, but the federal, in Nebraska, but the federal level at 10 parts per million. Governor Pellin's barns has 9 of them greater than 70 parts per million. 16 of them were hitting higher than 50 parts per million. And one of these in 2016 tested at 445 parts per million. And these are testing wells. So now what's happening is they're starting to look at the correlation between where this waste is being discharged or applied and how it starts to get into that drip drip aquifer, and then how it flows over time, and you're starting to see the dots connect. So this is just the beginning of that. Now the governor retaliated by taking his own environmental racist tone. He said Yen Shisu, the reporter of the Flatwater Free Press, he would not even read that article because she was from China, therefore most likely affiliated as a communist. That was his statement in retaliation. But he did say that we would be able to address this issue in the legislature this year. And the only bill that came forth was something to incent the industry's biotechnologies as a method to reduce nitrogen and not even use proven conservation techniques that work. Okay, second example, and then I'll pass the mic. The second example is what's been built all around you. It's the Costco poultry barns. You have 22 million new chickens that are inhabiting eastern Nebraska, all around the cities of Omaha and Lincoln. And that was the one that really got Dr. Alan Kolak at UNMC concerned, especially for the Lincoln area, but over time the whole area would see this degradation. I mean, how are we supposed to handle the amount of waste that 22 million chickens produce in this area per day? Johns Hopkins University wrote a letter warning the Fremont City Council, which in Greater Economic Development Corps, which they didn't take into account, that this would have to be unprecedented management of this kind of waste. The amount of waste we're talking about, as Johns Hopkins cites it, twice the amount of waste as the city of Omaha generates in human waste daily, is the amount of poultry litter. So, of course, we run some studies because all the nutrient experts told us, oh, this is just dry litter they form it into, so that stuff can't break down in your waterways. We're like, how does dry litter not break down when the heavy rains come and wash it right into the waterways? So we got some funding and we did a little analysis, and we did 3 years of testing before the Costco systems were going to spread their litter with the participating farmers in the area. We identified 6 waterways that didn't have buffers, that the litter was going to be spread on each side, and we did above testing and below the point of impact testing. And what we started to see in just 3 years, which would be a maximum of only 2 litter applications, most likely just 1 litter application up to that point, we already started seeing signs of changing waters. The water was forming towards eutrophication. And that was leading a climate in the waters that were allowing new pathogens just related to poultry to form. And so this is what's percolating around you. The excess phosphorus, another nutrient, what was causing that eutrophication scenario where these new pathogens can thrive in our climate. And this is going on all around you. We have to connect the dots. This is a statewide fight on water. We all will be impacted if we don't do something.
Thank you, Graham. So, Anthony, let's bring it a little bit closer to home, and in 3 minutes or less, give us some examples of just issues that face Omaha neighborhoods.
Well, I mean, I think, Brother Graham just hit it on the nail on the head of the lack of information flow is a form of environmental racism. But, and just to be clear, if you are a person of color in Omaha, you have environmental justice issues in your community. I would say the one that is the most ignominious within the city of Omaha, it's got to be the OPPD North Power Plant. I mean, that is just sort of like the environmental racism exemplar of what it actually looks like. But I would say, Kimara, just quickly, in addition to the power plant, which is reducing people's life expectancies by 5 or 6 years compared to the rest of the city, you have SR 75. That is an environmental racism issue. It cut a community in half. That is a living red line right now. The fact that North Omaha has less permeable surface than most of the other communities in the city, less access to healthy and nutritious foods, which Graham can talk about better than anybody in the world. Highest energy burden, which means that people are in North Omaha are paying more than 6% of their income just to keep their lights on. And the fact that it's a regressive system, so wealthier people who are using more energy and creating more pollution in North Omaha are not paying as much as a fraction of their income. So that's an example right there as well. Lack of equitable education, over policing, and lowest participation in the democratic processes. All of those are environmental justice issues for sure. And then overall, what I would say, Kimara, is that all of that adds up. The sum of all of that is that North Omaha is the premier economic and energy sacrifice zone for this state, if not for the Midwest writ large.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you for bringing different perspectives as well. Graham, you talked a little bit about this earlier, but can you give us some more information about just the connection between rural areas, Omaha neighborhoods, when it comes to environmental justice?
Absolutely. So let's pick up the conversation from where we left off. So, we got to the point of what happens upstream impacts everyone downstream. And all the way in the water's running, from the Rocky Mountains, as the snow melts on the top of the mountains, across our vast length of rivers across the state, and all these communities set up wells, next to those waterways. Some people, at least used to pull out of those waterways. But all of that runs to the population centers, which equate to about 1.2 million around Omaha and Lincoln. And so let's just take another look, and I'm going to do a little tribute. Anybody heard of the Sioux City Ghosts? No? You never heard of the Sioux City Ghosts? It's an all-black softball team from the 30s to the 1950s. They used to travel all around, and they whoop up everybody out of out of Sioux City. They're kind of like also did a lot of fun and tricks, and we're known to kind of compare to the Harlem Globetrotters of this softball. And so they have a really cool story. You should look up the Sioux City Ghosts. But why it's relevant to this is because probably a lot of those guys that were there playing for the Sioux City Ghosts, they probably got to Sioux City because of the meatpacking industry. So the meatpacking industry, Sioux City, Omaha, Chicago, they've been Goliaths in the meatpacking industry. So you've had a lot of monopolies running through there over the years. And one of the monopolies that still exists in Dakota City, just on the Nebraska side of Sioux City, that's Tyson. And so recently we invited a guest to the state from The Guardian, a reporter, and she did a little investigative work on this issue. So I just want to read a little excerpt from her reporting, just to put this in context, because we're still in the context session of this conversation. Tyson's 5 largest plants in Nebraska dump more than 111 million pounds of pollutants into waterways between 2018 and 22, which is a third of the nationwide total. So it's like starting to let that sink in. This plant's on the Missouri River north of us. Okay, all right. This included 4 million pounds of nitrates, and we know the problems that can cause. This plant is located in Dakota City on the Missouri River. The Dakota City plant is a major local employer and Tyson's single largest polluter. So out of all these plants in Nebraska, this is the big one, right? Dumping 60 million pounds of that 111 million total pounds of contaminants into these same waterways. So basically there was a deadly COVID outbreak, shut down 15% of the workforce, really threw some things out of whack there. And the reporter, we took her down. First of all, they met with some of the workers so that they can understand the context of what it's like to work under these conditions, especially when these companies refuse to do the basics, PPE, a good solid healthcare plan. These workers didn't get this. And of course, this happened in South Omaha as well, and throughout the city of Omaha and other locations as well. But then we traveled and took the reporter down to Winnebago, and we met one of our Regenerate Nebraska partners, Aaron LaPointe, who's up to big things up there. And the Winnebago tribe is trying to reverse as they start farming, as they start moving to get their land back and recreate an agrarian lifestyle with this land on the reservation. What Aaron said is the Missouri River is very important to our culture and people. They fish there, they eat the fish, it's sporting, it's a way of life. So then we head down to the Omaha, and the Omaha tribe was actually being proactive. They were starting to collect fish and start to understand, but they didn't have that information yet. But Tim Grant, the director of the Environmental Protector for the Omaha tribe, said, we're concerned about what's in the river. It's important to our culture and tradition, so we're going to start a testing program. So then you head south of the tribes with all this sludge coming out of that waterway from the largest contributor in the United States of America, Tyson, in Dakota City, and we moved to Burt County, which is where I'm from. And so all my buddies on the river, Takema, sludge going on. We used to go play in that river. We used to go boating in that river. That was like, if I could get away from farming and didn't have a baseball game, we'd be out on the river. That's what we like to do. We'd find a water hole. You cannot swim in the water anymore. How do you feel about that? What about your kids not having that experience in the Midwest? You can't go to these ponds, these lakes anymore. The Missouri River was pretty dicey as well. And so just to finish up that thought, next you move down south and you're in Omaha. And one of the 3 sites that pulls the water is at the Florence. And it is an aquifer. It's not right out of the river. So there are layers of protection there. But there's also a lot of things that MUD's putting in that water to get it to the point where some of these things aren't showing up so that you can be able to drink it. And that is the most contaminated well that involves the most work in the city of Omaha. And so what happens upstream is going to impact downstream.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you. Let's move away from the context. Let's start talking about, yes, please, round of applause. Great information, which also is being recorded, okay? Cammy, let's start talking about building environmental justice organizations. We know that Anthony and Graham both represent organizations who are in the area. We also that you spent some time working for environmental justice organizations throughout the country. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you did in those positions?
Sure. So I'm clearly the baby organizer that's in this crowd. I am not a subject matter expert. And I think it's important to point out because I think oftentimes the role that I played for about almost 7 years, I worked as a community organizer for the Sierra Club. And I started that career here, and then by the time I left, I was a national Cool Cities Energy Efficiency coordinator. So there were 13 states that I had the pleasure of overseeing and supporting their work around energy efficient building codes. Recognizing that buildings are like our biggest energy hogs, and how can we encourage cities to engage in that work. But I got started because in 2004, when I joined the club, they were looking for organizers to help support education to the community around the Asarco lead smelter, which had been shut down, and we had found that there were high levels of lead in the soil and that it was impacting our families here. Prior to going into Sierra Club, I was actually working for a Head Start and was a family advocate there. So my background has always been in psychology, working with people and families. That's where my heart has always been. So I will and still say today, I don't identify as an environmentalist, I identify as a humanist. And the reason I got in this work was because the planet is our home. And if we aren't caring for it, then we cease to exist. And that's the heart and the way in which I enter into this work. And so there was a child in one of the centers that I worked in that we found had high elevated blood lead levels. And so I started doing some research about what that was. And similarly, around the same time, maybe about a year later, the Sierra Club had placed an advertisement, and this is how old I am, in the newspaper, and that they were looking to hire organizers to help educate North and South Omaha community members about the blood lead levels and how the environmental issues and the pollution that was happening was causing some of these issues amongst children and families in our community. And I knew nothing about lead smelters or environmental issues, but I did know that direct impact of the child that I saw in my center and how it impacted them, that I thought to myself, I think I can do that. And so I applied for the job and surprisingly got it. I'm sure there were people that had a lot more environmental understanding of the work, but what we needed, and especially in that time, because in 2004, I remember newspapers and a journalist had told me, environmental work is fringe work. Nobody really cares about this, and it's just kind of that side thing that doesn't really impact all of us. Bush, too, was in office, and he was absolutely not a friend of the environment. We were still arguing about whether we should be drilling in the Arctic National Refuge at that time. So that's when I stepped into this work. And so the role that I feel like was really important, especially around environmental justice, was how do we take these issues which have been, like, as subject matter experts, you get it. You hear from these two brilliant men and Graham and I were baby organizers together back then. It can be a lot to digest, and people get scared or they get static, and then they just don't engage. And so my job was to help people understand that just because this issue is complex doesn't make it impossible, and to boil it down. And so when I started out in this area of just like basic health, and explaining to families, like, what does this issue mean? Why are these people from the EPA knocking on your door and telling you that they need to test your soil? What does it mean where there's this, like, 1/8 of an area outside of your drip line? What's a drip line? Like, there's so many aspects of the language that are so kind of convoluted and outside of a general person if you're not in it, that it can turn you off. So that was my job, was just to really humanize this work. And that as we kind of expanded beyond doing the work around the soil, and we started to see that there's an opportunity around how can cities pick up the batons that the federal government and state government kept just throwing away, not even dropping, they were intentionally throwing it as far away as possible. And I saw that there is a chance for us to really say, okay, how do we take super wonky things like building codes, which seem like this not necessary thing for us to pay attention to, but the impact of if we can get to the root of the problem, which is how we build our buildings, and start to shift that in ways that make it just natural where it happens every day, and putting it into code is a policy that makes it a requirement without people having to fight for it. So then I joined with a couple other organizers, and we got with our subject matter experts, and we just started championing across the country with trying to get people engaged in this fight to increase our energy efficiency and building codes. And we had a panel that we jokingly called Bringing Sexy Back to Building Codes. And so that's kind of was just some of the work that we started to do. But yeah, I don't get nervous about this and thinking, I don't know any of these like things and the history and all that. You don't have to. What you have to know is like why you're engaged and what pulls you in, because that's what environmental justice work is about, especially on this micro level.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So this is what happens when you have people on the stage, regardless of what Cammy says, you are all experts, but that also means that sometimes Kimara has to get the hook. So we're gonna have to move on to our next subject, which is advocacy and policy. And that's an area that One Omaha is exploring more as we have these different conversations. And I wanna start off by asking Anthony a question, and that is, can you talk about what our elected officials on the federal level can do to address environmental justice issues that face our neighborhoods here in Omaha?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I would say the first thing and most important thing they can do is get out of the way. Send the money and then, you know, back up. I mean, no one in DC should purport to know about the specific nuances of EJ challenges in Omaha any more than they should New York City, Compton, you know, wherever else. So, I mean, that's really the job of the federal government, is to only intervene when a lower government is practicing environmental racism, and then to step in and stop it. So I think that's, you know, first and foremost. But I mean, I would argue that they really ought to know about the environmental justice challenges in their congressional district or the people that they represent at the state level. And you know, their job literally is to represent us and to bring federal dollars into the hands of Cammy, yourself, Kimara, Graham, and many others, so that they can do the business of implementing environmental justice. And then I would also say, I mean, because I know we were running like a little on time, like all federal and local level you know, lawmakers really ought to know about the organizing principles of environmental justice. There's only 6. It's not even that many. We made it really, really easy in 1996 when our EJ elders came out with the James Principles for Democratic Organizing. Principle 1, be inclusive. Principle 2, emphasis on bottom-up organizing. Principle 3, let people speak for themselves. Let people speak for themselves. Principle 4, working together in solidarity and mutuality. And Principle 5, build just relationships among ourselves. And then Principle 6, a commitment to self-transformation. If federal lawmakers can find a way to articulate that and draw it down to the local level and then let us do our thing, many amazing things will happen. For example, my city that I grew up in, New York City, home of the 28-time world champion New York Yankees, 27 times. Oops,
Where's the hook?
Tony has been elusive. But I mean, we came up with the most aggressive building decarbonization law in the nation, Local Law 97, or the Climate Mobilization Act. Federal government gave us our money. They got out of our way, and we organized and we did what we can do. So I mean, I think that's really what it is. And then the last thing that I would say is that, especially for states like Nebraska that don't have an environmental review process like the National Environmental Policy Act, don't roll back federal policies that are going to protect local communities from things like disproportionate exposure to the OPPD power plant, and no one-size-fits-all approach like switching to frac gas or carbon capture sequestration or hydrogen combustion may work in Detroit, but that doesn't mean it's going to work in Omaha.
Absolutely awesome information. Graham, let's talk about the same thing, but bring it to the state legislature. What can happen there?
Well, it starts with having representatives that are environmentalists or focused on this issue, and like frankly, we just don't have that right now. And we really haven't had that since Ken Haar. I don't know if you all remember Ken Haar, Senator Haar, since he left. And I do want to give a little bit of props to Senator John Kavanaugh. John's been exploring some of these things. We've worked with him on a few things. I'd like to see a stronger focus on this, you know, from him, like I would everybody, of course. But, you know, if you're all thinking about running for office someday, we need some environmentalists out there. Yo, come on, we need it. We haven't had anybody to work with and carry bills in over a decade. And it's horrible because we're getting waxed in the legislature on agricultural and natural resource issues. Now, there's a whole slate of things that we've been talking about that we do on the renewable energy side, but I do want to focus on how we're going to get at, you know, stopping kind of this predatory and extractive industry influence that we're seeing as these monopolies have formed into behemoths. So let's just take a look at some of that kind of stuff. So the number one thing, for a quarter of a century, you're not going to believe this, but Nebraska had a ban on corporate farming. If you're an out-of-state mega system like Costco or these 100,000 head dairies that are coming in from California and tolls in Wisconsin, you just couldn't do business here. It was to protect an independent network of family farmers, something that we could have grown and built around, that could have established permanently a strong middle class, which has been corrupted in the rural areas. And so that socioeconomic difference is leading to all kinds of misinterpretations and bad electoral politics, in my opinion. Bring back the corporate farming ban. Let's tweak it to get around the things that didn't work out, that the court struck it down. We need it back. It protects everybody and allows for more competition and more businesses, farming-related businesses, to be able to flourish. And then we can redevelop a supply chain that's not so monopoly controlled, and that's going to be a big deal too. We need to restrict the meat packers for being able to own livestock. That used to be something that was really strong in this state. We had the ban on them from being able to own pigs up until here recently. Cattle's the next thing on the chopping block, and that's going to be a really scary day. And it doesn't stop there with these meat packing monopolies. Once again, you all saw what happened during COVID-19. So we just need to restore some basic human rights within those meat packers. They have to be able to treat people, ethically, with principle. We have to get back at building up a strong supply chain with decent wages again. It's a better option for a lot of folks that come here to start off in these meat packing plants, but this has gone downhill. Those wages are relatively the same. And at least Costco, for example, when they started up, $13 an hour wages they were offering on the kill line for Hormel in 1979 when I was born. Those wages were $13 an hour. Where have we're not making progress, folks. You got to get involved on the ag side of thing, and it touches not just the farmers, not just your health, but also the supply chain workers who will continue to see predatory abuses. We need to redo a matrix system. That sounds weird, right? But there's a system that we borrowed for Iowa that grades these things, these mega systems these animal confinement systems that are 100,000 head. You get a whole bunch of the points by filling in your entity's name. It's a plug and play. You go through the matrix, you apply for one of these things, you get plugged in, and all the groups that are supposed to protect your water, they look the other way and they're involved in a big cover-up, and that's what's going on in the state, and that's why your water is degrading. And so we need to redo the matrix so that it incorporates not just environmental standards, but standards that can restore socioeconomic opportunities in rural areas. And what do I mean by that? 2/3 of Costco's barns are owned by a North Carolina investor. They're not even from farms here. The money is getting siphoned out of our communities. It's a scam. I want to be able to see restore local. I want local control restored. Last year in the legislative session, the governor put forth a bill that would have eliminated the public hearing opportunity in the Planning and Zoning Commission, which give recommendations to the county board on what policies they should put in place, what kind of regs. To eliminate that would have taken away the people's voice and protected him as he continues to expand bigger than the 13th largest hog producer in the world. So these things all have to happen, and there's some cool little things that we can do, and I got this fun map that I'd love to share around and like to talk to people more about. But let's start from the east side of the state where the population centers are, and let's work with the farmers to put them in solution-oriented roles along these waterways and cut off the leaching that's going into the Elkhorn River, the Platte River, then seeping down into the Missouri River, all the way down to Mississippi, into Louisiana's Gulf Coast, where all this contamination is just splurging out. We can start by leading by example, by buffering our waterways from one side of the state, east to west in Nebraska, protect people's health, and protect people's health for way beyond here. That's a winner. Our farmers deserve to be in a position where they can be solutions, and we need leadership that's going to show it.
Christensen for Nebraska 2026.
This is a non-profit organization.
Just saying.
Okay, this is wonderful information. Heavy information, and we have to process, also have to continue, but I'm thankful that we're recording this as well. Cammy, you ran for city council in District 3 in 2021. Yes, that deserves all kinds of applause. In your platform, you included policies concerning environmental justice. Can you talk about the policies you included and what made you want to include those policies in your platform?
So I think it really just kind of started back with my time organizing around this. And as I said before, like saw how federal government, state government dropped the ball. And then there were these movements from like 2006 to about 2010. I was working almost exclusively with mayors in cities on how do we start to address climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And it started through, there was the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, which was started by the mayor in Seattle. So this grew to where there were like over 1,000 mayors across the country representing almost 78 million people that agreed to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 7% below the 1990 levels. So that was like the goal. And this was something, it was the Kyoto Protocol, which the US was part of, and then at the time Bush II decided not to sign or to be a part of. And so mayors were sick and tired of waiting for federal government to do the work that we needed done, and so then they decided to do it. And it was from that experience of working with, alongside Mayor Beitler at the time, Mayor Settle, and Mayor Priester in Bellevue, and seeing how local government could start to do things that our federal government was dragging their feet on. So I knew that if I was gonna run, I needed to incorporate values. And so the 3 values that we had on the campaign were sustainability, equity, and community. And I actually intentionally did not do an environmental justice specific platform, but I had policies that I wanted to fulfill because I felt like sustainability needed to be infused into everything we did as a campaign. Because too often the way, and the fact that I do equity and inclusion work today, too many people silo and put those in a side corner, and it makes it easier to drop that idea off when it becomes too hard or when it becomes too controversial. And so the same thing with equity work and community engagement in policy making. I wanted to make sure that environmental justice and sustainability was blended into the fabric. So that's what really inspired me. The policy pieces, really this man right over here. I'm smart enough to know that I don't know everything, but there was research and then talking. I started to figure out who were the experts in our community right in front of us that could help us develop practices. And Anthony has just like such a vast connection from working in like Colombia and supporting the president there around their policies, but then also Congresswoman Cori Bush had developed, right at the time, yes, she had developed some policy that she was trying to get passed on in Congress so that we can have national, again, federal trying to take the lead where they should, and it was stagnating. And so he came to me and said, hey, Cammy, these principles we could possibly put into place for a policy for on a city level. Let's talk about how we can make this work on a municipal level. And if you get in, this could be what you introduce as your climate plan. And so that's what we were working towards. Unfortunately, we didn't get to cross that bridge. But I think there's so many examples nationwide of people already doing things. And that was what kind of inspired me, and looking at that local politics have a place to make changes where and address some of the things that our state and our federal government aren't doing.
Thank you. Talk a little bit more about what our elected officials at the city council level can be doing when it comes to environmental justice issues.
So right now, we're gonna need these tools to put it into the budget.
It was the eyes for me. I don't know if we just had our budget discussion, and we know that there is a gentleman, the city does have a climate action plan's full-time staff member. There's a beautiful article that the Flatwater Free Press wrote in 2023 about the climate action plan. And what was really interesting was, I remember when is it Freddie is his name, right? Is that the... Robert is the gentleman, like his last name starts with an F. I'm just making up names for this poor gentleman. I don't remember. But like he has been brought on, and they're in the article, they talk about how, there's a little bit of deja vu, because in 2010, even though the mayor will tell you that we have never in the history of this city had a climate action plan or started that, in 2010, people had created a climate action plan. We did start that, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I was part of some of that, but it was the environmental element that we were working into the comprehensive plan. There were over 130 suggestions. That plan
like this one, was not provided a budget. So we're starting to have the same pattern that happened over 10 years ago. And so that's what our elected officials need to do. We cannot continue to have practices and policies that need to happen go unfunded. We know that the budget is basically a moral document. We fund what we care about. And public safety has to extend beyond police and fire in the streets. It has to start to look at the impact of these continuing climate crises that are happening and growing every single day. And if we aren't putting it into the budget, then it's showing that we don't care about it. Creating a plan and having the faux kind of public comment survey does not say you care about it. It means that you're thinking about it, but you're trying to window dressing.
So, what a lovely transition. Next year, we have city council and mayoral elections coming up. So what type of advice would you give to people looking to run for office this spring, or how to include plans to address environmental justice issues in their platforms? And how can we, as everyday residents, urge these people running for office to include environmental justice in their platform?
I would say just do a little research. Y'all be surprised how many of these city office running people don't even look up what other cities are doing. It takes one simple little Google search and you can find what similar cities are doing. So that would be my advice if you're running for office. Just Google what Cincinnati is doing, what's happening in like Crete, Nebraska even. There is examples. So if you're running for office, do a little research and see, because Omaha is not the greatest city in the country. It's not even the greatest city in Nebraska. I'm sorry to be the one to break that to you.
We call that intellectual curiosity,
yes,
by the way.
Yeah, so do that. And then as you all, as individuals, when you ask your candidates that are running, like, ask them what types of programs are they planning, are they emulating or looking at that are happening in other communities that they want to try to bring here. And don't take a broad answer of like, well, we've got this climate. Ask them for specific cities that they're looking at, and then ask them if they can send you or point you in the direction where you can find out more information about that specific policy that they're planning to model or utilize. If they can't point you to a specific example, that means they're actually not doing the research and they didn't really think about it.
Okay. So, Anthony, would you like to follow up on that really quickly on anything our city council members and or mayor's office can do to address?
No, everything that Cammy just said. We need to transition from climate action plans to climate action policies. Plans like collect dust in shelves, and if there's no accountability and mechanism to implement them, then you've done a really nice thing and created a nice book with a bunch of nice pictures with no intention of implementation. I would also say that, like everything that Cammy said, one of my favorite quotes is by a beautiful brother named Amitav Ghosh, and he says that the climate crisis is a crisis of the imagination. So, push your lawmakers at the city level to have more of an imagination. The same kind of imagination that 10 years ago brought me together with a dude from Oakland, Nebraska. I'm a black loudmouth socialist from Brooklyn, and now I can't get rid of this person, which brought me, the same imagination brought me into Cammy's life. Tell your city council members that maybe instead of wasting time and taxpayer money on code of conduct statutes to incite interdiction against a black councilwoman, how about a code of conduct to dismantle the climate crisis and environmental racism right here in Omaha? That's where I would start as well. And then finally, what I would say is just that, yes, to everything that Cammy said, more participatory democracy, more participatory budgeting. If the mayor comes out with a budget, we come out with our own budget and we say, this is what we want. Take it to your city council members. If your city council member is voting without your consent, they are not working for you. They are probably working for a political party, or they are working for a special interest. That's all.
Okay. So, we have a couple more questions, and we'll do about a minute each. We're going to go in specific order. We'll start with Anthony, then Graham, then Cammy for this question. What types of actions do you think neighborhood organizers in Omaha can take to address environmental justice issues in addition to advocacy with their elected officials?
First thing you should know about any environmental justice organization, if they don't have a plan to organize themselves out of business, you should be skeptical of them and what their true intentions are. The goal is not to be an environmental justice organization forever. It's to give and redistribute the power to people so that you become obsolete. That's the difference between a formation for the people and an organization that acts just as a corporation. And then yes, you've got to hold your elected officials accountable. You have so much power. You have the ability to literally, what's the term I'm trying to use? Recall bad lawmakers if they aren't serving you. Show up at city council, give them hell, let them see what you look like, and then yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say it, like risk arrest. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I've spent 3 days in the Omaha correctional facility as their guest in solitary confinement, made a new man out of me, but if you know for a fact that there is an OPPD power plant that is choking out people, just like the same people who are being choked out by toxic policies, toxic police, and toxic air, and we're not doing anything about it, it is going to impact you eventually. You cannot run from climate change. You cannot hide from it anymore, no matter how rich, white, or affluent you are. It impacts you. North Omaha is you. Last thing I'll say, Kimara, is that we have a saying in the EJ world, which is intersectionality, which is all environmental justice is. Intersectionality is not supposed to be convenient. That's why intersectionality is an exercise and not a political party or a nonprofit organization.
Well, obviously, like, be aware of what's going on around you. Look at this in a holistic picture. Look how connect the dots. This is a lifelong thing. But when you're doing that, you're a step ahead, and that's the last thing that I'm just gonna say they want you to be doing. So, and then I like when I'm developing plans, I like to come up with very general topics to start, and then you start constructing what that could actually look like. And I'll just kind of give you a little bit of an example. So, all right, well, the nutrition is not good in our community. We don't have access to healthy food. Well, maybe then we need to take more control over the food system, maybe complete control, that'd be food sovereignty. And then now we start looking at, well, where's the food going to come from? Well, we got urban farms and farms around the periphery, but the city of Omaha, as part of their climate plan, haven't talked much about being able to make sure that people in all communities in Omaha have access to food when the lights go out. And that's not very proactive thinking. That puts more and more of us at risk when the blades hit the fan. So we have to actually. So, and then here's another piece of this, and this is one of the, right after water, probably my next biggest concerning issue. But well, then let's develop pathways to the land. So if it's in your heart to want to become a farmer and grow food or health products or whatever, well, we need to have an opportunity to be able to allow that to happen. And it doesn't matter if I'm speaking in my hometown or a tribal community or the inner city. There's always a handful of kids that light up when I talk about regenerative ag and how creative you can be with this and where you can bring forth these solutions. We need to groom them and make them part of a future farm team. And so the land right now, though, the problem is inaccessible, high prices, not even generational farmers can be able to afford it. It's being gobbled up by investors. We have to reprioritize that federally and in the state now. We need to create pathways that allow young people through an educational system that could come through Metro Community College with the development of some good curriculum that teaches the whole broad, holistic sense of all the things you can do around food, health, and wellness. And we need to find out how we can partner with the Omaha Land Bank so that it's useful for being able to place more people on urban farms within the city. And we need to start working with the philanthropic community and purchasing some of the land around the peripheries and allowing educational programs to create those pathways so that people who's in their heart that want to farm can be part of all of these solutions, including making sure that we close the nutritional deficiency gap that exists all across this state, and particularly in East Omaha. Nutrition is a human right.
100%. Ditto. And we have to get back to understanding and learning how to do coalition work. Too much of this, I think we've forgotten what a coalition actually is. And if we're going to do organizing and we're actually going to start to win again, we have to recognize that we need intersectional, diverse coalitions that are going to focus on collective impact.
Thank you. Just really quickly to that point, I love what Cammy said, and the reason why I just want to pick this up is because two things. Solidarity and coalition, it doesn't mean you have to like each other to win. All right, this idea that you always have to get along. I have a saying, just because I organize with you doesn't mean I'm going to invite you to watch the Yankees or I'm going to date you. Solidarity is about a common goal that you're willing to work to together. I want to give a shout out to my de facto cousin-in-law, Mark, speaking of an urban farmer, right there. Just get to know him right afterwards. I was just there. It's the scene, man. And Alex O'Hanlon here in the Free Farm Syndicate, and many people in the audience. That is urban food system. So everything that Graham said, it exists. But like Cammy says, you got to know about it to get about it.
Thank you. I think bringing up coalition building as well. We didn't have a chance to dive into that, but you're exactly right. So on October 29th, for our audience, we're going to be featuring some Omaha residents who are working actively on environmental justice issues here in Omaha, Nebraska. So if you want to learn more about ongoing projects, right, and how you can get involved, please plan to be here at the Benson Theater on October 29th. And then my final question I have is for all of you, and we'll start with Cammy, then Graham, then our final with Anthony. What sorts of questions do you think that neighborhood organizers, residents who want to address these environmental justice issues should be asking themselves as they prepare to address these issues?
I think the first question you have to ask yourself is, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? I think too often we want to jump to what's the tactic we want to do, and the how. It's like, oh, well, we want to address energy. I'm just going to start having everybody put solar panels on the roofs. What's the problem you're trying to solve? If you're trying to address energy insecurity in a neighborhood, solar panels on one person's house address that one person's house. It doesn't address the global problem. So perhaps what we maybe want to start looking at was the lessons that we learned from the pandemic, which is decentralizing our resources. And so maybe you want to start looking at solar co-ops. How do we share energy? So that's the question, I think, the first and foremost you have to ask yourself. What's the problem we're trying to solve? And then start looking at the what and the why of that problem before you launch into what tactics and the how you're going to solve it, before you even know what you're trying to solve.
I think that what always helps me is, what kind of world do I want to live in? I'm imagining this world. I'm imagining my rural community, and it's not there, and so that serves as a blueprint, or I guess it serves as like a shell that we can be able to fill in. My rural community, I don't want to see it just be all old people, because all the young people couldn't come back to the farm, so the business is all shuttered and there's no opportunity because monopolies control it all. I don't want to be a part of that with degradation of soil and air and water. That's not the vision I have of the future of my community. I want to see the Maya out there as my neighbors. I want to see people who are regenerating the land and cleansing the water. And I want to see us sharing healthy foods and sharing in our skills. And I want to see small businesses come back, like what my grandparents used to say existed in these areas, to help prop up a more diversified farming operation where biodiversity can allow our creativity to go to unending directions as far as the solutions that are created to the biggest crises. So what do I want to be a part of? And so everything I do is a part of a vision of what I hope I can see in the future. I know I'm not going to get it all, but at least I can step that way, and then some people can come next and be able to build off of the pathways that we allow to be open. And then my indigenous friends always say, look 7 generations above. What we're doing now in our feeble human just trying to do the best that we can is going to be flawed, but we should still do the best we can. We should get the most out of ourselves, and we should be able to look 7 generations down the road and imagine that what we did out of the good of our heart was going to allow more opportunities for those generations to really knock it out of the park so that everything can be regenerated. I won't see that in my lifetime, but I want them to, and so we're setting up for that.
Oh, man. Run, buddy, run. I think two quotes for this, Kimara, which are very, very important because they were said by two of the most important Black writers, period, of all time, who, just deracinated the idea that environmentalism is a white people's thing. The first quote comes from James Baldwin in his breakup with the United States of America, his book, No Name in the Street. He says, "We are responsible for the world in which we find ourselves in only because we are the only sentient force which can change it." So that's huge. And then the GOAT, the greatest, Audre Lorde, she said in 1970, "The earth is telling us something about our conduct of living. We must preserve the earth upon which we seek while formulating questions and looking for answers." So I'll be quick because these are the 6 questions I always ask myself. 5 of them were developed during my time with the Climate Justice Alliance that my comrade Thad in the audience was a part of, with the great Cooperation Jackson as well. 5 questions. Always ask yourself these 5 questions. If they're not being asked, I am concerned about your success level. 1, who tells the story? 2, who makes the decisions? 3, who benefits and how? 4, how does this build or shift power? And 5, really, really important to everything that was just said on this stage, what else will this impact? And then the 6th question I ask myself is, what would Graham or Cammy do?
Smooth. Okay, so we have about 10 to 14 minutes for some questions that we can take from the audience. If you notice, we have a lovely microphone right up here. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask our panelists, please make your way to the microphone on this side of the stage. And it looks like we'll have time for about 4 or 5 questions, if anyone has any. Wonderful.
Don't scare us with socialism.
The left is weak, and the numbers in this room are indicative of that. And that's not an indictment on us, necessarily. But sometimes it feels like we talk in echo chambers, and I'm wondering how it is that we get out of the echo chamber. Because if we want to win, we got to get people on our side, and you don't do that by being a purist and being unable to work with people, as you all have alluded to. You got to be able to work with people, or at least engage with people who don't come into these spaces with the politics that clearly we all hold. So how do we connect? How do we build this movement?
Yes, love that question. Thank you. So if you have not seen the guidebook, The Social Justice Ecosystem, I highly recommend that you get it and you read it. It is literally a workbook about how do you create ecosystems to win and create, but also while building community and sharing power. It's acknowledging that an individual person may be able, it says, I think there are like 10 or 11 roles that are necessary in order for a solidarity movement to be effective. And no one person should be trying to perform all 11 of those roles. Even if you think that you can, you should not. And in that, what it requires you to do is look at your strengths, ask yourself the question of what roles have I been trying to play or been playing and I need to step away from, but who are the people that I need to start to connect with, to share power with, and to build power with so that we can actually be effective in a movement. And so to that point, exactly as Thad said, we have to start to step out of our circles and those bubbles where we feel comfortable to do this work, because when have you made your greatest change? When you were extremely comfortable? We don't. So we only change when things get a little uncomfortable. So we're gonna have to start stepping into and practicing those tools. There are lots of resources. One Omaha is one of them that has workshops. There's resources all around this community and across the state where you can practice in spaces that we call brave spaces. Stop looking for safe spaces, start looking for brave spaces where you can practice this work in a way that still upholds dignity, but also challenges us to actually get shit done.
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah, huge. That, comrade, I would say that I mean, one of my highlights of my life, not just like being in Omaha, is putting that into practice with my comrade, Graham. I thought he was playing a cruel joke on me with some of the places he's driven me to in Nebraska, to be honest, and I thought I said something about his mom or something, but no, these are some of the greatest people I've ever met, talking about sitting around with old patriarchal men crying about the state of agriculture in rural communities and connecting that with the state of food apartheid in urban areas as well. So, I mean, it can happen. I think the reason why our model worked is because we didn't really have a nonprofit model where we're a formation, not a nonprofit. We're like a militia. People can go and come as they please from the collective work. And sometimes you got to take a break from each other. Let's just face it. I mean, comrades, we are assholes to each other. Like, we don't have to be all up on each other all the time. But again, we don't have to agree on everything. I mean, I do think it's important to be pure, but not necessarily to have purity tests all the time. So if someone misgenders somebody by accident and then all of a sudden they're ostracized, that's not building power. That's more upholding your ego, and we don't have time for that anymore. So I would say that the thing that I take away from your question, comrade, is that the first thing that Omaha needs to do is everything to eviscerate the idea that it is one of the most segregated cities in the United States of America. That is pathetic. That is sad. Except for where Graham lives, which is Denver, but I mean, the rest of the city is pretty well connected. So we got to figure out ways to connect the city with public transit. As Gustavo Petro says, transit justice isn't about getting affluent or poor people rather into electric vehicles. It's more about getting affluent people to take public transportation. So let's connect each other, and then I think we'll get to that. But I'm just saying, if there's someone here you've never seen before, have a conversation with them. If you're from Dundee, invite them to something from Dundee, and yes, come to North Omaha frequently. Go to South Omaha frequently, not just to eat or to look for houses to buy, but also to meet people who are already living there.
Yeah.
Who has the question, actually?
Do you have a question, Esther? I think it's just me. Going to try to ask this as concisely as possible. Solidarity building, coalition building. I mean, I've loved all the talking points, and it's definitely has me thinking about a lot of stuff. But for lack of a better way to say it, the thing that's been on my mind lately is what, if anything, is the use of socially shaming people. I feel like that's a complicated term. People have a lot of feelings about that. But there are individual people who are more responsible for a lot of this, that are standing in the way and are often still treated like respectable people when they go to church, when they go to the grocery store. And some of the actions that they're doing are just so detrimental to the community, the planet, everything, that it's just part of what allows it to continue is that we have treated them as they're socially acceptable. And other societies would have kicked them out. Do you have any thoughts on that? How do we hold people socially accountable? Not electoral politics accountable, but on a daily basis. So,
I just think that, number one, we have to expose things that are real and right out in front of us and not be afraid to talk about these. So I exposed tonight some things about Governor Pellin that was exposed prior, by the media. And I'm not here calling him a big fatty or names or, trying to shame him in any such way. I just think that those things people need to understand if we're to be able to redirect towards solutions. And that's where I'm at. I don't like shaming, but the facts are the facts. And when this stuff is real, this stuff, we need to repeat it if it's bad so that we can get better. And that's where we can get into the solutions of things. And then I just wanted to hit up that, really, really quick with you and pick up. Anthony said some things, kind of alluded to some things. But the Regenerate Nebraska Network, that started, we met in this Young Climate Leaders Network. I ended out of that deal going to France and meeting all kinds of, badass people talking about regenerative ag, came back here. Yo, Anthony, this stuff, hits all these areas that both of us are concerned about. So we then are able to go to these kitchen table conversations in these rural areas, get these farmers' perspectives on is regenerative ag the solution. We find out they are, but everyone says, maybe we need to listen to other perspectives besides what's happening on our rural kitchen table. And that led us on a journey in which our funders didn't appreciate, because we went and listened to people from other communities. We went to the various tribes and we said, regenerative ag, what do you think about that? Then we listened and we learned, and we went to the inner city of Omaha, and we went to organizations like Inclusive Communities, and we learned. And that's what shaped the whole mission statement and the vision of Regenerate Nebraska, was everyone's vision together. We combine it, there's a piece for all of them. And now we're starting to know like who each other are, but then we talk and then we trust each other. And we may not get to see each other that often, or like Anthony said, you may get sick of one another from time to time, but it's the long-term trust. We're going to be here for the rest of our lives, many of us, most of us, or we're going to be working on this stuff. But a lifelong, life living, you got to have a lifetime of trust is what it takes, man. You got to commit to that, and you're never going to be able to do this unless you listen and build trust and try to work for one another. And when something dicey comes up, get the perspectives, and you'd be surprised the kind of ideas that come out of that. And that's where the power is.
All right. Oh, we have time for one more question.
Hi. Graham, we should talk after this because I'm actually in charge of community affairs at the Land Bank now, but that's an aside. But in my practice, in my advocacy, I focus a lot on regional planning and development. And we talked about the comp plan a little bit earlier, but I'm just curious about more thoughts of how we elevate environmental justice when we're looking at regional planning practices, and then also just in general when we're thinking about how we're developing our physical environment, how it's a conversation that we could have more with obviously some of our developers and other folks in our community about that being a concern and what we can do.
Now, I know that was a loaded question.
That's huge.
We're going to try to get answers in about a minute and a half each.
Thank you for that question. I think it's extremely important. I would say that, first and foremost, to what Cammy's earlier points about using imagination. Look at what other cities do. Omaha does not have an Office of Environmental Justice. Neither does the Douglas County Commissioner's Office. And making sure you're filling that with people who are actually impacted. I think that police accountability boards with real power is also something that could lead to more environmental justice as well. And then, I really just think that our city council members need to go visit other places. There's no reason for Omaha to be insular. We're connected by this amazing river to some amazing cities doing amazing things, from Detroit to Duluth and all the way down to New Orleans, as Graham was saying earlier. So got to get out of silos, got to get comfortable with discomfort. I call it social yoga. And as Graham said, get ready to have good old-fashioned yelling matches. I don't think you can really trust anyone until they're confident enough to tell you you're full of shit, and then still have a great relationship with them, as Graham and I do.
Alex, we're going to have a lot of blinking for this video, okay?
I would say that look at the language that the developers, the folks that are having more power in those conversations around the comprehensive plan, and then utilize that language to infuse the values of sustainability and climate action into it. We have to make it look like it's already their idea. Because ego plays such a huge role in the decisions that are being made in this city, that find the language they're using and meld our work into that. So when you're having your comments, know what the other side is saying, the reason why they can't, and then you build that into your comments. Ask them about accountability. But to the question about shame and blame are not an effective tool to create change. It might make us feel better, but it's not going to make those people change. But accountability is not shame. And we have to get away from that. And there's a whole bunch of research around shame. So make sure in the comprehensive plan, when you're giving your comments, that you're building accountability processes into the recommendations and the work that they're talking about. Because accountability is what we're seeking. That's what creates change.
Just lay out a more specific example. And so in East Omaha, with some of the urban farming community trying to figure out the bigger objective is, how can we not just be making it barely on 1 acre and killing ourselves here. And so it started up a discussion, well, how do we create a pathways program? And through connections, and I had a good one this time. There's Dr. Kofi Bo in Ghana who had developed an educational center that was helping funnel young people into smallholder situations, giving them the technical assistance, the education, the tools they needed to succeed, and then they were aggregating those acres and selling to bigger labels by the time it was said and done. And so, we're planning on picking up the conversation with Dr. Boa here in Omaha, because Dr. Boa is an alumni of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He wanted to learn about the interior of the U.S., so he came to Nebraska. That was literally the reasoning. And he went back and became a regenerative guru of the whole globe. We could develop a program that around his educational system. It could be in partnership potentially, and this is the things we're hearing and talking through within the last couple of years with Metro Community College or another educational entity that would have this broad array of tools. Then you would go to a working farm in the area and you'd put those tools that you learned in the books and through that educational process through an active learning experience, a physical learning experience. And then after you went through those processes, you could be able to be certified and say, okay, land bank, now we can take these acres, not just give them the scraps of land, but the good plots of land, because these people earned it, and making sure they have a chance to have tenure on the land. Because urban farmers, last thing I need to really say is important, in this area are struggling because it's 1 year in, 1 year out, they're rotating around, they can't regenerate the soil, they're being kicked off, and that kind of policy is never going to work for anyone that's trying to be a part of a food system. We can't get anywhere in 1 year. It's just not the way that this works. And so getting out of that mentality that is this year and then we'll pull the rug, because that's how it has been with the land bank, but changing that so that this could be really, really something that can allow then the next step to bigger plots of land around the periphery. And then we're starting to seal up the nutritional gaps with people from these communities that were meant to do this.
So unfortunately, that's all the questions that we have time for now. But I really just want to thank you all for coming here and being with us tonight. Our audience for being here. We really appreciate you taking time to come out to learn about these issues, to discuss these issues. Can we please give our panel another round of applause? I was going to have a part two. We've only been doing this 2 years, but the information is just absolutely amazing. Now, if you would like to access follow-up resources or a video of tonight's conversation, you'll be able to find that on our website at oneomaha.org, and the one is spelled out. If you want to receive updates from when our website is updated with the video and the resources, just make sure you register for tonight's event if you haven't already, and we'll be sure to keep you updated when those resources are available. So thank you again to the Benson Theater and to all of you for coming out. Good night, everyone.